In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the process of resizing a embroidery design that we created here inside InkScape with the InkStitch extension. So this was an embroidery design that we originally designed to fit a 4-inch by 4-inch hoop, and we want to resize this design to fit a 5 by 7 hoop. And we're going to stitch this on an adult small sweatshirt for my daughter. So first thing I think that would be helpful for us to do would be to change the size of our actual document to our hoop size. Now, typically, when you watch other people's videos, that's one of the first things they talk about is resizing the document itself here inside Inkscape to the size of our hoop. So here we are in our layers and objects panel here, and we're going to click this down arrow and we're going to choose this option. We're going to choose document properties, and that will bring up this dialog box. So we do want to change our unit value to inches, and so for the width we're going to do 7, and then for the height we're going to do 5, and then of course you'll see that change in our document. So we're happy with that, and now we have a 5 by 7 document. So now what we can do is we can freely just resize our design visually and scale it to fit within inside this box as big as we want it to actually fit in our 5 by 7 hoop. So we'll do something about like that. Now when I do scale it, I'm coming from the corner here, and I'm also holding my control key to constrain the proportions so that when I stretch it the width, I'm also increasing the height. Okay, so that is as big as it will fit essentially in a 5 by 7 hoop. I do like to leave a little bit of extra room side to side there. So the main consideration when we're resizing designs, the main consideration will be the underlay that is applied. The underlay that we use when the design is tiny, like in the case of the original design where it was 4 by 4, will likely be different than the underlay that we want to use when we enlarge it. Okay, and of course, underlay parameters could change depending on fabric type and things of that nature too. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at how many stitches the design is right now just by scaling it. So we're going to choose extensions, and we're going to choose InkStitch here, and we're going to choose the simulator. Now, one other thing to point out about making this design larger, the only reason that we're able to do that so willy-nilly is because we are using the original native InkScape InkStitch file. So we're not using an embroidery file per se. So in other words, when we do scale it up, all the parameters that we originally assigned to all these shapes, all that stuff is going to be expanded to fit the new size. So when we're looking at it here in Simulator, you can see it looks perfect. And that's because, like I said, all those parameters that we had originally applied just got scaled up, and it's considerably more stitches now than it was. So you can see here, currently we're sitting right at 15,900 stitches. Okay, and the main thing that I want to take a look at doing is the swoosh. I want to add some underlay to our swoosh because I feel like it's going to need it to go on our sweatshirt. And then I am going to go ahead and add underlay on our black satin border around the kitty. I am going to go ahead and add underlay to that as well. However, I don't really think it's necessary. And the reason I don't really think the underlay is necessary here is because the satin border on our kitty cat, it is going directly on top of existing stitches. So it kind of already has an underlay because we've got our wording of our Nike, and you can see that the satin border goes over the top of the Nike, and also the body, the white embroidered area of the kitty face and ears. So it kind of sort of already has an underlay. But I want to just have you take a look at, well, how many stitches are we really talking about if we're adding the underlay under the kitty face? We definitely want to add underlay under the big swoosh here. So let's go ahead and close that out and take a look at that. We'll start here with our little Nike swoosh here. We'll go into InkStitch here, and we'll come to params. And you can see here, it stitches out lovely, but if we go to contour underlay, we definitely want a contour underlay. So that we definitely want. And we're just going to accept the defaults that InkStitch gives us for this. But you can see here what that contour underlay consists of. That is all there is to a contour underlay. It's basically a running stitch. We're asking for 3mm stitches, and the inset, we're telling it to go 0.4 of a millimeter inset. We could increase that if we wanted to. You might want to. In this case, I'm just going to leave it as is. I think that'll be fine. And then we're going to switch over. We are going to add, and you can see that that contour underlay for the entire swoosh is only 140 stitches. So you can see that's really nothing. So no big concern there. Now when we go over to the zigzag stitch, we'll go ahead and add that. So we do want our zigzag. And probably the main thing to point out here as far as the zigzag, we'll stop it right there. So you can see that's more or less right where the zigzag finishes. And you can see that that's 434 stitches, including the contour underlay as well. So both of those, so all of that underlay underneath our Nike swoosh currently only consists of 434 stitches. But I do want to point out here, and this is something that's important for you to look at, when we come up here to check our needle points, you could see what's going to happen here. So the zigzag is going from side to side, side to side, side to side, side to side. And why that's an issue for us is because we previously measured that this distance is about 25 millimeters. And so what would happen is your embroidery machine, when it has to make this huge jump like it's doing, back and forth, it would go dead slow. When it got right down here by the paw, it's going to go, it's literally going to go that slow, going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And when it gets to here, it's going to go really, really slow because it's got to make that big 25 millimeter jump. So we do want the zigzag underlay, but what we don't want is we don't want that huge jump and our machine slow down to a crawl. So we do need to specify a maximum stitch length, and we're just going to say 3. I mean, you could use whatever you want. In this case, we're going to use 3. And now you could see, let's stop this for a moment. Now you could see all those extra needle points. It will not stitch farther than 3 millimeters. Okay, so your machine will not slow down. Okay, and that's what we want. And we do want that extra support underneath our satin stitch as well. So there you go. So that should work out real well and should fill in real nicely. And you can see that if we go all the way up to where our underlay finishes, our total number of stitches here is 1,529 stitches. So compared to the original design, we're adding an additional 1,500 stitches. So what that means to us as embroiderers, we've added about, from a thread usage standpoint, that's negligible. Like you couldn't even really probably put a dollar value on that. But from a time standpoint, if I had 50 of these to do, I'm only doing one for my daughter. But if I had 50 of these to do, well, then time is money. And so stitches would mean something to me. In this case, we're adding 1,500 stitches. So what that really means to us as embroiderers, we're adding 2 minutes. 2 minutes of extra stitch time is negligible. Now, if we were doing 50 of these, then obviously that 2 minutes would cost us 100 minutes, right? So that's just, something to consider. Do we, I'll be honest, do we need this much underlay? I mean, I would like some underlay, yes, but we could change the peak-to-peak distance because I don't really think we need this much underlay. But I'm going to go ahead and stitch it out this way just to test it out. And the more and more I think you use InkStitch, the more and more you'll understand what params you should be using, depending on the fabric you're using and stuff. Because, yeah, we don't want first of all, we don't want bulletproof designs. You know, we want them to be comfortable when we're wearing them. You know, we don't want, super stiff designs. So if we don't need all this underlay, there's no point in having it. So it'll be more comfortable without. I'm gonna try it just the way it is because honestly, I haven't had a chance to do a lot of big embroidery stitch outs with various params to be able to tell the differences of what I like and what I don't like. So that's just something you're going to have to experiment on your own. So yes, that will take care of that underlay for us. That's the main thing that we wanted to do. Um, the next thing that we could take a look at is the underlay. We could possibly decrease the underlay of our Nike lettering, but again, I want to see how this stitches out full size with just the default underlay that InkStitch gives us. So I'm predominantly just going to use the defaults. Now I did have to change the maximum stitch length for our zigzag, but other than that, no. I'm going to just use the InkStitch defaults, okay? So next, we're going to come up here to satin border, and we are going to add some underlay to all of our satin border pieces. And so what we need to do is come in here and just select those pieces that are in fact going to be a satin border. So left whisker, left whisker, left whisker. Path is not. Path is a path. It's a running stitch, so that's not satin. And our left eye, nose, and right eye, those are satins, but we're not going to add an underlay to those. So, we'll do the right whisker here, right paw, right paw, left left paw, center bow, right bow, left bow. Scoot on down here, main 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I clicked on one, hold your control key down, click on all the others that we want to modify the params, and we're good to go. Now, a quick note here. We do have our email address in our listing description. So if you want the original file that we started this video with, just so you can kind of follow along this video exactly, just send us an email. Says, hey, could you send me the Swoosh Kitty file, resizing file, and then we could send you the appropriate original source file, and it'll also include the finished embroidery file that we are actually going to take to the machine and embroider. So if you just want to take the design straight to your embroidery machine, you'll be able to do that as well. And we provide the design in a variety of file formats. I have a Brother PR600, so I use the PES format for the Brother, but we give it to you in DST and a variety of other formats, so it should work with any embroidery machine out there. So with that said, let's come up here to extensions, InkStitch, and params. And basically, we're going to do the same thing here that we did with the swoosh. So we are going to add a contour underlay. We're not going to modify any of those settings. So we're just going to leave all that alone. And then over here on zigzag, we are going to click yes. Let's add zigzag as well. But again, it's just going to add the zigzag. We are not going to have to specify a maximum stitch length or anything like that on this one. So I do want to show you this though. So this is 2,800 stitches roughly. So let's just call it 2,900 total. If we didn't have zigzag or we didn't have contour underlay, what would we have? We would have 2,000 stitches. So you can see by having contour and by having zigzag, we're adding about 600 stitches. So roughly, we're adding about a minute. Actually, we're adding just a little bit more, probably a minute and a half, because it looks like we're adding about 900 stitches for that underlay. So 900 stitches would roughly equate to probably 2 minutes. We'll just call it 2 minutes stitch time. And then you remember previously on the swoosh, we also added 2 minutes of stitch time. So now we're at 4 minutes stitch time. So, that could be important. And like I said, if we're stitching out thousands and thousands. And so that's where we may look at the density on the swoosh. the underlay density for the zigzag. Do we really need all that zigzag? We could save some stitches there. And we probably could save some underlay stitches on our Nike lettering as well. Possibly even on the face of our kitty. We could save some underlay stitches. So if we wanted to try and maximize our time and lower our stitch count, those are some areas where we could definitely experiment and see if in fact we could pull off some of that underlay density and not have it quite so dense. It might make the garment feel better and not quite so heavy on the embroidery, because this is going to be a pretty sizable design, but also lower stitch count, quicker stitch out. So let's go ahead and click apply and quit here. And then let's just take one last look at the entire design as a whole. So InkStitch, visualize and export simulator. Now, if you remember, at the very beginning of the video, we were about 16,000 stitches, okay? And so now we want to take a look at the stitch count, which should be right about 19,000 stitches, if my math is correct. So we added about 3,000 stitches or so. Yeah, look here, 18,230 stitches. So we'll call it 19,000 stitches. So not too bad. You know, you're probably looking at 19,000 stitches on my machine, thread trims, you know, all of that. You're probably looking at about a half an hour for this to stitch out in its entirety. We can go to the info button here, and you can see we do have 15 thread jumps. So let's turn on the Froggy, and you'll see where those thread jumps are happening. When it finishes the satin border up here at the bow, it's going to come down and do this bow, or this paw, and there's a jump over to this one. Then there's a jump to the whisker, 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 jump to the eye, to the nose, to the eye, back to the whisker, whisker, whisker. Okay, and the reason you have all those thread jumps is because I wanted that satin stitch to sit in a very specific chronological order, so we had to have those jump stitches. I wanted the center of this bow, this satin, to sit on top of the left and right side. I wanted the whiskers to sit on top of the cheeks. I wanted the paws to sit on top of the head. So because of that, we had to stitch it in this order to get those exact results, and that's why we kind of have a few extra jump stitches that we wouldn't normally like. It's not a huge deal, but if we could avoid them, we try to avoid them like the plague. On my machine, it's going to, unless I tell it to otherwise, it's going to look at all these jump stitches and it's automatically going to trim the thread. So it's not a huge deal for me, but for someone who's on a home embroidery machine who doesn't have automatic thread trimming, you would have to go back in and snip those threads, and that's sometimes a pain in the butt. In this case, it won't be so bad, but if it can be avoided, we try to avoid it. So with that said, that's it for this one. Let's go ahead and save this. So we're going to save. Let's click Save As, and let's go to our desktop. And we already saved it previously, and then I realized I made a mistake, so I had to redo this video. But right here, we're going to do the Swoosh Kitty file 5x7 as an SVG, so we are going to replace it. And that will be InkScape's format. So when we save it as a SVG, we're saving it as an InkScape file. Now we're going to save it as an embroidery file. So we hit File, Save As again, and this time the name stays the same, but we are going to save it as a Brother PES file in my case, because I'm going to stitch it out on my Brother PR600. So we'll go ahead and click on Save. It's telling us that there's already one there, but yes, go ahead and replace it. Beautiful. And now we are ready to go embroider our sweatshirt. So I hope you enjoyed this one and learned a little something about resizing designs and how to go back into params and add underlay or modify some of those underlay settings when you scale a design up like this one. And you know, the main key point here is the only way that we were able to successfully scale it up and still have perfect embroidery is because it was the original native InkScape file that we were scaling. We weren't scaling an embroidery file. Like if you imported an embroidery file and let's say that embroidery file had 20,000 stitches, and then we went and shrunk it down half size. The embroidery file would still have 20,000 stitches. So it would stitch out miserably because we just shrunk it down half its original size. And so, but we didn't shrink the stitches. Well, in this case, we scaled it up. So it started out at 7,000 stitches. Now it's up to 20,000 stitches. And that's because we scaled it up with the original native InkScape file, and so it added those stitches as necessary based on the params that we had previously specified. So when we're talking about scaling embroidery files, we're talking about scaling native embroidery files, not just any random embroidery file that that we buy or find on the internet. All right. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching.